3 at 4:30 p.m. in the Nauset Room. May also be joined via Zoom or through Channel 8, and we have people on the website. In attendance from the Affordable Housing Committee is myself, Nancy Wren, Bill Stockard, Susan Carlson, Fran McLennan, and I want to welcome Maria Smith for her first official meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee. We're glad to have you as part of our team. First, you want to?
I'd like to call the Housing Trust to order, and just note that Ward Gorey, Tom Jakowski, and Alan McLennan are in the room. Katie Wibby and Alexis Matheson and Matt Cole are remote, so we have a quorum.
First order of business today is another update on the next phase of our housing needs assessment with Laura Smead and Jen Goldson. The topic today is to discuss preliminary goals and strategies and the community forum that was held in early September. So I will let Laura get to the mic. Welcome.
Thank you. And so again, I'm Laura Smead. I'm the Senior Community Planner at J.M. Goldson. And Jen's over there, founder and director on the screen.
Jen.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
Yeah, so I actually think I'm going to have Jen start the presentation, assuming you can see, the people online can see the screen and everything. And I'll just advance the slides when she tells me to. And we can get into it. Does that sound good? All right.
That sounds great. Well, thanks, everyone. Laura and I are really glad to be here. I know that it's been quite a process so far, and the work has come quite a ways to the point where we have draft strategies to talk with you about tonight, which Laura will get into the details of. But really, I just wanted to say how pleased we are to get to this point, and we're really looking forward to your feedback. It's not a science to write these strategies. We really look very carefully at the goals and try to help the community understand and identify what types of those strategies can help get them to the next level. Orleans has already done quite a lot, and we really want to try to build off of that so that over the next few years you can really know what your next steps are. And so, Laura, I don't know if there's a schedule you want me to go over, or, okay, right, so what we've done so far. So what we've done so far is really doing the comprehensive housing needs assessment, looking at development constraints, working towards trying to understand what Orleans housing needs are, including a very customized survey that we went over, I think, a few meetings ago. And then we had a community forum, I guess that was last month. I'm losing track a little bit. Laura and I were both there, and we had a good group of very thoughtful community members that we really appreciated their feedback. And they took a look at draft goals and gave some comments on those, and then started to think about what kind of strategies can we think about. And so tonight we just really want to share what those draft ideas are, and get your further feedback so that we can go ahead and refine that. Is there anything else, Laura, that you wanted to say on this slide?
Nope, just we're ready to kind of talk about what we're doing today, and at the end we'll talk about where we're going next.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'm going to hand it back to Laura. I'm really more observing today. I know it's a little awkward with me being remote, but of course I'll chime in if there's anything that would be helpful. And I do have, the reason I'm back in Boston right now is I do have another commitment. I need to leave at 5:30, but I'll be here for the first hour. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
So tonight we're really presenting and discussing the draft housing goals and strategies and reviewing the community forum outcomes. We're not expecting these to stay how they are. We're really interested in your feedback to modify, add, eliminate strategies to really arrive at a final shortlist that will get included into the 10-year housing plan and that will write more extensive narratives for. I think, if you all received kind of the long list here, And we know that you only have 10 years to do this, so we know that this is probably too many as it is. But we would love to get your feedback on how to make what needs to get prioritized and modified and so forth. And you don't have to make decisions about that today. We'd love to get whatever feedback you have today, thumbs up, thumbs down, that kind of thing. But really, you have a week to think about it and write things down more precisely. And then in a week from now, we'll collect those and kind of know where we're at. So just to touch base a little bit on how the engagement that feeds into all of this. We've done 3 sorts of engagement. We did focus group surveys and a community forum for a total of 444 participation points. We call it participation points rather than people because, some people may have done more than one of these things. But that's a pretty respectable number, and I just want to acknowledge all the work that went into getting people who attended and responded to all of these things, and that's really as important a source to the plan and goals and strategies as the data itself. And the framework that we're working with are really trying to have the needs lead us. So your key need indicators that we found in the first part of this process. And then from that, forming some goals for what are the desires for sort of solving or addressing those needs. And then what strategies are we using for achieving those goals to address those needs? So they all kind of flow together. Just a reminder about the needs indicators, looking to have more diverse housing, a lack of rental units, a need for smaller units and barrier-free units, particular attention toward low-income homeowners with housing problems. By that, we mainly mean, if there's some maintenance issues or overcrowding or something like that. A need for more deeply affordable rental housing for extremely low-income households. A need for more financially accessible year-round housing for both families with children and also for employees and employers to accommodate your economy. And so all of these things kind of got brainstormed into this long list of strategies. Your existing planning documents, related planning documents, the community engagement strategies and feedback, planning best practices, and then other successful initiatives in similar places that we thought might work for Orleans. And from that, we kind of brainstormed this long list. And when you're thinking through these strategies, just think of it kind of as a spectrum. I mean, it might be that you fully support it as it's written. You might be like, nope, I'd like to remove it entirely, but more likely you'll be somewhere in the middle. And if you're somewhere in the middle, just think about, is it that you need more information on this idea, or do you want it to be tweaked or edited in some way? And if you do, having the more precise you're able to give with your feedback, the better the plan will be in the end. All right, without further ado, getting into the goals and strategies. So on the slides, to not have people's eyes glaze over and get into some death by PowerPoint situations, I'm just showing the overall goal, but I have the strategies printed in front of me, and I'm assuming you do as well from your packets. So the first goal is to amend the zoning bylaws to incentivize the development of missing middle housing in the village center and areas along Route 6A from the Rotary to the Brewster line served by public sewer. There's a graphic there showing to some extent what we mean by mixed middle housing types. And really that's changing your zoning bylaws to allow for things like duplexes, triplexes, quads, and so forth. Considering higher densities of multifamily housing and evaluating what is the financial viability that's needed. So the density that's needed for that kind of financial viability to attract funders and partners. Getting a little more specific there. So we've suggested some best practice densities there. You may decide that needs to be different, and maybe it just needs to be further evaluated. But those are a few of the strategies we have for that. And there are 13 or so of these slides. So I'm happy to keep going, or we can pause at any moment. You can jump in if you ever have a question or a comment. All right. So the second goal is to amend the zoning bylaws to allow and encourage smaller homes in single-family districts. There's a few examples by what we mean there. So studying the potential benefits of new residential zoning districts. Right now, you don't have a whole lot of differentiation in your single-family zoning. Having a district with smaller minimum lots, less than an acre, basically, where either the lots currently exist or where they're served by public sewer. Allowing for duplexes, and that may be a true duplex, it may be a single-family home conversion, like a large historic home converting into a duplex. And that would be allowed sort of within existing so-called floor area ratios, so you wouldn't be changing so much the size and scale of a building, but you would have two smaller units within a similar size and scale to what is there. And encouraging cottage communities, so houses that are less than, say, 1,500 square feet. You could even have little subdivisions with cottage housing in a shared open space or wastewater treatment area. And then determining whether zoning is still a barrier. You've done a lot of zoning related to accessory dwelling units already, but are there any barriers that remain there, like allowing for a larger size, for example, of 1,000 square feet is an idea to consider?
Laura, I have just a couple of comments on this. 2A, you talk about 40,000 square feet now required is in the only residential district. There's a unique situation here in Orleans, which I think is probably unlike any other town on Cape Cod. And that is when the zoning bylaw was increased to 40,000 square feet in 1971, March 9th, 1971, lots that were 15,000 square feet with 100 feet of frontage and lots that were 20,000 square feet with 120 feet of frontage were determined to be legal. Those lots still exist, and they can be built upon. So I think we want to be careful saying that Orleans just allows development on 40,000 square foot lots. That's not true. And in your maps, you note that you say that these lots are non-compliant. That is not true. They comply with the provisions of the zoning bylaw, and the town meeting voted to protect them. And they can still be developed, and it's a surprise every once in a while if someone finds one, but it's not 40,000 square feet, and it is legal to develop it.
And do they need to go before the Board of Appeals for a variance or a special
Nope.
permit or something?
Nope.
It's just building permit?
Yep.
Okay. How do you?
Because they're protected under this
Yeah.
provision in the bylaw.
Okay. How do you determine, like, setbacks and things like that? Are they the same?
Well, the setbacks would be in the same district, so they may need a variance for setbacks, but,
Okay.
I've seen, let's see, there are a lot of these small lots in Nauset Heights, and there were 3 pretty big houses that were built out there about 15 years ago. Court case determined that it was legal for them to go. So I just want to make sure that we don't send the message that we're like everybody else and we've got 40,000 square foot lots. And,
Yeah.
you know, your maps have some interesting statistics, and one of them says that 43.8% of the parcels in Orleans comply with the 40,000 square foot provision. That means that 47% are
Are
smaller,
different
but
in
are
some way.
legal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think, because your table says they're not compliant, they are compliant.
Okay.
So I hope you would correct that.
Sure, yeah, happy to correct that. And it's just a question of whether or not you want to perhaps expand upon that in an area that is served by public sewer then. So, if there's some,
So, yes,
that.
in downtown, in the RB, LB, and Village Center District, there is no minimum lot size. So there are residential uses downtown, there are non-residential, and lots can be developed for single, two-family, or whatever is allowed, given the setbacks. And the interesting thing is that the zoning bylaw was created before the town was sewered, and now that it's sewered, there's a significant opportunity for additional housing in the downtown area,
Yeah, definitely.
without requiring variances. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I had a comment on the zoning articles. It would be really helpful for me to evaluate these if I knew what the town already allowed, because as I read them, I think some of these are already allowed, but I'm not sure that I understand the zoning bylaws enough to actually be clear about that. So if we could, in moving forward, have some clarity about which of these is actually a change and which of them is stating what we already do.
Yeah, so we did evaluate all of the strategies with both George and Marcia to try to eliminate some that we felt like had already been accomplished. But it could be that some of the language either needs to get tweaked or refined or maybe spelled out. For example, in the 2D around the accessory dwelling units, you already do allow accessory dwelling units,
Right.
by right, but perhaps the size could be larger allowed or something like that. So sometimes I think it's just a matter of when we write the narratives for the strategies that are on the short list. Making it clear if this would be a brand new sort of idea, or if it'd be more of a modification or extension of what you already have.
That would really be helpful. In 2A, just I hope a correction in the last part of that sentence where each lots currently exist or are served by public sewer. I think it needs to be and. But I could be corrected.
So I think in this case, it sounds like it would become and. I think as it was originally written, that was where we were thinking that those districts were not necessarily allowed by right to add on or so forth. So I think that change makes sense. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other comments on the strategies for this?
I just had a
goal?
question on both the two of them when they talk about amending the zoning bylaws, and this may be premature, but is there any sense that if we went going forward and we feel that these are strategies that should be pursued, is there any sense that the planning board in the town is agreeable to pursuing these same types of goals of amending the zoning laws? And George is smiling.
I'm smiling because you don't know the answer until you ask the question.
Right.
The planning board is certainly aware of the acute housing issues and aware of environmental concerns and other issues regarding long-term planning for the town. But I don't think these would come out as plain as they're written today, but I think the spirit of them would definitely be entertained by the board.
Yeah, and we did look at your existing plans and policies, select board priorities for the coming year and so forth, to try to make sure that we weren't proposing something that seemed out of line with at least the spirit of where the town wanted to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Any other comments on this goal? Okay.
Can I just to jump in
Yeah.
what was just said made me wonder about the planning process. You're providing a set of strategies and goals working with the town. Then the town has some work. And it just seemed to me like just in this last exchange, there would be some room for some type of a summit meeting or cross-group meeting and prioritization of what, these are things we can get going on. These are things we do want to consider, but we're going to have to talk about. These are things that are low priority. It'd be interesting if as we move along, I guess I should be doing this. There is, if you guys could provide some guidance to us about some of those cross-coordination strategies
Yeah,
that would
so-
be necessary.
It's interesting you should bring that up. Actually, in Goal 11, 11B, we do suggest to create what we're calling it Orleans Housing Roundtable, to provide for ongoing coordination of housing efforts and ensure implementation of this, implementation of this report. So
I
that.
thought we were going to get knighted at the round.
Yeah, so you can decide kind of what that looks like, how often it meets. We're suggesting at least annually to sort of decide on, priorities and issues and so forth. So that's something that, a couple other communities do, and especially it's something where you have so much good resources here with the trust and the housing committee and CPA and coordinators and, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, I think is great. Yep. So, all right. So the next goal is about incentivizing the development and preservation of financially attainable year-round rentals. And here we have some goals clustered on here. A couple do relate to accessory dwelling units, but more as a programmatic rather than a zoning initiative. So if just trying to determine if there's additional financial incentives or maybe a technical assistance, staff assistance for those who have a desire or could show that they're renting an accessory dwelling unit as a year-round rental as opposed to, short-term rental or seasonal rental. As well as perhaps creating a grant program that supports some rehab needs to improve and legalize existing ADUs for property owners who agree to rent at a year-round affordable rent level to low and moderate income households for a specific minimum term. You could even have a program that, in exchange for that, deed restricts those units so they could be on your SHI or something like that too. And then incentivizing landlords to keep their rents affordable and year-round by offering property tax abatements for those who rent to low and moderate income households year-round. There's an example out of Provincetown that does something similar to that. And establishing a financial incentive grant or low-interest loan program for commercial property owners to convert existing properties into year-round rental housing or mixed use. Ideally, those would be deed restricted and ADA accessible. So you can have priorities as a part of the program for the kind of who gets the money, right?
George?
I just want to ask you about that property tax abatement question. You said Provincetown does it. Is that generally legally permissible, or is that a home rule petition that Provincetown benefits from? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. Jen, do you know off the top of your
It
head?
is a home rule
Yeah.
petition.
Yeah, so there's some real restrictions on what you can do with property tax abatements.
Yeah, those can be a little tricky. I know that some try to structure it so year-round residents get a little more of a break than seasonal and so forth, but I think all of that's home rule. Yeah.
I think the other way to do it is if any of these dwelling units were encumbered by a deed restriction for affordability, then the assessor will reduce the assessed value down to that level. And that is, in effect, a reduction in taxes. So that, for example, at 18 West Road, which is 41 units, there are 11 low-income units, affordable units, and the units in the building are assessed at $350,000 to $450,000, but the units that are affordable are assessed for about $150,000 because they have the deed restriction on them.
Yeah,
And
makes
I think,
sense.
short of special legislation, I think that's the only way you can reduce the taxes on something like that.
I see,
Do we want to put
it's
that?
too small to read the name, but someone has their hand up.
Katie?
Yes.
Katie?
Hi, thanks. Thank you. I was just actually wondering what it looks like to qualify tenants as low to moderate income. Like, what is that, how does that get assessed? Are we asking tenants or landlords to get tenants proof of income or tax returns? Are they qualified through a separate agency? I'm just trying to wrap my head around how that's.
Yeah, that would definitely have some capacity implications. So you can do it one of two ways. You can partner with like a third-party housing service agency to kind of administer that program for you and handle the paperwork and the vetting and so forth. They might do it for like a set fee per application or something like that. And the other option would be to have a more full-time kind of housing coordinator or somehow otherwise partner with some regional housing service agency that may be potentially starting up at some point in the near future for Cape Cod. So there's a few different options. They don't even necessarily have to be local to Cape Cod, but that's ideal.
Ellen, did you want that assessment idea to be put into this instead of the property tax abatement?
I'll leave that, you can double check it and see how you want to correct
Okay.
the tax abatement issue.
Okay.
That's-
Any other comments or questions for this goal? The next goal is to accommodate what we're calling alternative housing. So seasonal housing, transitional housing, congregate housing. Usually these are a little bit more for, special populations, maybe seasonal employees, maybe people facing housing instability. So amending the zoning to allow for some higher amounts of density for congregate, cooperative, or co-housing. If you think of sort of the density you might allow for something like a hotel, allowing a similar level of that, assuming, of course, that they're able to meet the wastewater standards or are on sewer. Adopting zoning amendments to provide small efficiency units to provide permanent supportive housing, particularly for formerly unhoused or those vulnerable to housing instability. The example there is, the Canal House, for example, in Orleans is from the Community Development Partnership, but that's an example of sort of what we might call a single-room occupancy type of housing. And considering zoning amendments to allow for dormitory employee housing for seasonal workers. I've seen, I think it's Yarmouth who does something where they just change their zoning bylaw to allow up to a certain percentage of existing hotel rooms to be able to be given essentially to the employees that work at that hotel. So they're able to sort of live there on the premises while they work there. And an alternative, so that's one way to do it. Another alternative would just be to straight up allow them to build a separate sort of dorm property on their property. Any comments or wait, I think there might be more. Oh, wait, there's more. I have to turn the page. All right, and then the next one is allowing for tiny home villages or tiny homes as standalone primary structures in addition to accessory dwelling units. And I'll say that with an asterisk because there are some concerns around sort of what building code does and does not allow for that. There is one, Nantucket actually explicitly allows for tiny homes, but generally speaking, most cities and towns that sort of allow it do it as a detached accessory dwelling unit, which you already do. There is some examples of tiny homes done as sort of a subdivision model, like out in Worcester, as a way to help, especially for supportive housing for people who are facing housing instability. But, it's still kind of one of those evolving things in the building code. So that's my caveat on that one. And then the last one is acquiring properties for co-living housing for the town seasonal employees or transitional housing for town employees while searching for a permanent home in Orleans. Any questions or comments so far on these goals or strategies?
Laura, the Housing Trust could actually do this under existing charter, if the project was the right one,
Which,
with the co-living housing.
okay, that's interesting.
We're not precluded from doing that if we found the right deal.
I think that's the way this is all lined up, is some things are things we can already do, some things are things we should do, something we might like to do, and I think it's a little bit, I've gone through this 3 times already, so I hate to even say anything, but it seems like we're still looking at 3 levels of information here, and if we're asking these questions, then I believe that the questions will be asked of us. So it's what can we do, what do we do, and what would we use? It seems to be the issue right now. So I don't have a solution for that, but I do have a concern.
Well, we certainly want to make sure that everything on this list is something you can do.
Well, we can do something we can do because other people have done it, things we can do because we already have the zoning or the right to do it, or something we can do because it's a great idea. All right? So I'm not trying to make it more difficult, but the reality of it is that it's a little bit like a stew. You pick out what you like, and then you say, well, that's a great idea. Oh, Alan says we already have that. Or, that's a great idea. Is it legal? Or do we need home rule for that? So I just think, it's another layer. Maybe we have to, once we organize these and cut them down maybe, or do something, that's the next step in terms of knowing where do we go from that. So,
Good point.
Could I add to what you're saying, because I agree with you, but it would also, I think, be helpful for us to know who needs to have the conversation about each of these things, because I think some of them would be the planning and the trust, different groups or subgroups of people could work on some of these issues, but I think it would be helpful to know who is the primary source that would be in the room for the conversation.
Yeah, so once we have, if we're relying on you in the next week to kind of shortlist this for us. So let's just focus on ones that you all pretty much think are, yep, that's a good idea. We know for sure we can do that. Maybe we leave the more questionable ones for another day. We just want to make sure that each goal has at least, a couple strategies to help support it. And then in the full plan, we'll write out some narratives, some case examples in there, some ideas for funding if that's applicable, and also have a spread, like a matrix, a table that will show which strategies support which goals, because sometimes the strategy will support more than one goal, as well as what are we thinking, generally speaking, might happen short-term, mid-term, long-term, who are the key players, who's the lead. Yes, to kind of get you started.
Great, thank you.
thank you.
And if I could just chime in, Laura, if you don't mind. If there is anything that you can already do, which I'm hearing that some of these, you're like, we can already do that, why are you recommending it? Then those need to come out. We're not looking for a list of what you can already do. We're looking for how can we help you get to the next level? And so if there's things you can already do with no tweaks at all, and it's by right, and you can do it, then we need to take those out. So you can help us identify if there's anything we miss in our current due diligence on that.
Good, okay.
Excuse me.
Ward, go ahead.
Yes, it just struck me, Jen, that there may be things that we can already do that we're not doing, things that we can already do because we don't have some of the prerequisites to do it, and we may want to prioritize doing those. So I like the idea of screening those, but I'm not sure I go all so far as to take them out. What I'd be interested in seeing us work with you on, and I think we have some homework to do internally, is what are the priority things we're going to go after? And then Fran's question of who's going to have to get going on that, and there'll be a whole series of questions.
Yeah, I think, for example, if it's a zoning amendment that you're like, well, we already do this, or we don't need this, then we can eliminate
that
that. But
makes-
if it's a matter of, oh, we already allow this by right, but we haven't done it yet, well, maybe that's an easy win,
Yeah?
Maybe
Easier
that
than
goes
going up to-
short-term,
To add to that,
so-called easy win.
maybe there's a reason people aren't doing it. Maybe there's something about the way you allow it that's providing a barrier.
Yeah.
It's the parking requirements,
costs money.
or maybe the only areas you can do it, there's no lots that are big enough, or, just throwing out examples. But there could be there could be tweaks and refinements to how you do it, or how you let it happen, that can help it. The other thing to think about is, for some communities, they may allow ADU by right, nobody does it because people don't know about it, or there could be some other barriers that we could look for. But the idea here is to give you advice on how to take that next step. Does that make sense? I can't
Yes.
see anyone, all I can see is myself right now.
Yes.
Heads are nodding, Jen.
Okay, good.
All right. So moving on to,
Katie has her hand.
oh, sorry.
Again?
Sorry, Katie,
I
you're,
don't know if
Katie?
it's-
That's okay, I'm not in the room, I get it. I just had a quick question. Did I hear the last goal was to provide preferential treatment to town employees over any other occupation?
I understand that there may be a question of, sort of fair housing there, but I think there are ways forward if it's really a temporary or transitional housing. Sometimes there's more flexibility when done on a part-time or temporary basis for a particular population, like employees. So we're not suggesting, yeah.
I was more getting at, not so much how to do it, because I think there are certain issues there, but more that we have singled out a particular group of people, occupation, however you want to term it, over others as needing preferential treatment. I'm not sure I would agree with that, and that's what I was wondering.
Town employees,
how we got there.
yes.
Yeah, so I think we suggest both, here we're just calling out town employees, but we also have another strategy that also discusses employees in general. So there's a model out in Colorado called the Vail Indeed model that some of you might be familiar with, that helps for any employee. So it's, in particular, maybe the town steps in also for town, but in general, to have housing be more affordable and financially attainable to people, even at higher incomes than typically allowed to purchase a home. And it would be deed restricted, but at, higher income levels.
Thanks.
These are really good questions, guys. I knew I was going to get really good questions tonight. The next goal is to reinforce and enhance neighborhood architectural character with design standards while facilitating housing through streamlined permitting processes. This strategy, we have sort of investigate options here and kind of a long list of ideas. So this is certainly one that could get more refined. But whether it's design guidelines or form-based code or typology playbooks, so sort of having, by that I mean it's almost like little architectural renderings and standards that you display on your website that developers can use to know exactly, hey, if you are building this, you'll be a shoo-in. This is exactly the sort of thing that we're looking for, to really give them examples to grab onto. There's green building design standards to explore, universal design standards that can be built in, and then adopting those standards or policies as indicated. So it's more of a let's explore this further kind of a strategy. And then just auditing your current permitting process and checking that against some best practices to see where things might be able to be streamlined and coordinated, just to maximize the efficiency of that pipeline. Any thoughts on this goal or strategies? Okay. 6 is to create and preserve more deed-restricted affordable housing serving low-income households. So this is really more of the bread and butter of your subsidized housing inventory. You can study whether to increase the inclusionary zoning percentage for more affordable housing creation, but you do have to look out for, financial viability of housing projects. So that's something that needs some careful analysis. revising the zoning provisions to add density bonuses for deed-restricted affordable housing at higher or deeper affordability than required. Considering supporting private development through the state's local initiative program or local action units. So now that you're imminently close to being over 10% on your subsidized housing inventory, you can still use comprehensive permits, but in a more friendly way, to allow for more dense housing in an area where it might not be exactly zoned for that. But if you're all in agreement, there are pathways forward to do that. And then acquiring and rehabilitating substandard housing, it might be tax foreclosed or condemned, or, and then using that to create more deed-restricted ownership housing, and establishing a process for the trust to kind of review that list and map regularly, which may be something you already do, but is still a good way to kind of chip away at creating more affordable deed-restricted ownership housing. And then continuing to monitor your existing deed-restricted units on the SHI, and evaluating opportunities and barriers to creating new deed-restricted units on housing authority properties, designating some capital cost funding toward the housing authority unit construction and maintenance, and then designating Community Preservation Act funds for creation or preservation, and advocating in general for more state-level housing authority funding and Section 8 vouchers, because we all know those are underfunded. Any additional?
Laura, just based on your experience, what have you observed and participated in relationship between local housing authorities and cities and towns?
It varies quite a bit. Some towns, like in Canton, where I used to work, they were happy to use community preservation funds to help them preserve those units and potentially expand those units. Other communities don't perceive that as a local role, and they prefer to just defer that to the state, and they're like, this is the state's property, we aren't going to help fund it. But, you know, it's really about, in my mind, meeting a need that exists. So it's allowed, it's just more of a policy decision. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On E, I'm not sure exactly what, well, I'm sure, tell me more about what you mean by monitoring. I understand that the contract that we signed with the Housing Assistance Corporation just recently will do some of this, but not perhaps the extent that she's talking
I'm hoping it will do all of it.
about. Yeah.
We are not in a position to monitor units and check incomes on an annual basis for rentals and things like that. So HAC is doing it at a really low cost. I think it was $250 per property per year.
And that, if by monitoring you meant a kind of early warning system about if we're going to be coming up against the end of the deed restriction, or
Sometimes, yeah,
if there are
sometimes that
some-
was, but not in your case.
right, we don't have
Right.
that, but
Yeah, this
are
is
they in
more
really
about,
full compliance? Are the people who are living there really qualified?
yeah, so it's that, in particular for rental units. It also applies if an ownership unit goes up for sale or resale, but where it gets really tricky is when an ownership unit goes up for sale and they're trying to sell it at market rate and be sneaky, and then that's, you know, just catching things like that, because you only have a limited amount of time to be able to step in, especially where there's a bankruptcy at play or something like that. Sometimes you have to swoop in to try to preserve the unit, or it goes off of your rolls.
It might be interesting for you to look at the arrangement, the agreement we made with the Housing Assistance Corporation, see if there are elements that could be, you know, added to that by us at another point.
Okay, yeah, certainly you'd want to continue on doing that, but maybe there's some added services that you might benefit from.
So Ward, several years ago, as I remember, and George, you can correct me, we had a unit, an ownership unit that we had, was having difficulty getting sold to a qualified low-income owner. And HAC told us that they were having a problem And the trust had a preliminary discussion, we might have to step in because we didn't want to lose it. We could step in and control it so that it wasn't off the inventory.
I think it's a need,
Yep.
and I think we have a potentially good vehicle.
If I may, just so no one's alarmed by this, the deed restrictions the town has taken on town housing projects are such that the clock does not start to run for that finding a qualified buyer for the town's action until such time as the town receives a qualified letter of intent to sell in writing, along with an appraisal and a maximum resale price. So there's some legwork required on the seller side. They can't just decide that they've dropped something in the mail and they, commence their market activities. So there's good protections in there. We
Yeah,
have not lost a unit in 25 years.
Yeah, that's great.
Say that all the time.
Yeah, you may be in a better position than some towns, because I've definitely seen cases where things go into foreclosure or bankruptcy and things get kind of messy when it gets into the courts, yeah.
The most difficult thing we have is the age-restricted affordable units. It's very hard to find someone who's qualified and can pay a mortgage, who has reached the age for qualification and does not have the substantial assets, but still has a significant income to pay that mortgage and condo fee. So thus far,
Yeah.
so far so good.
Yeah. All right, any more comments or questions on, this is goal 6 out of, I think we have 13? So but we're moving along at a pretty good rate. So the next one is about fostering partnerships. You already have a lot of partnerships, and those can be continued and strengthened with local and regional organizations that address housing needs in Orleans and the region. This might also include lending institutions, public service agencies, obviously the Community Development Partnership, and you could design and fund a housing stability program, something like that. Exploring public-private partnerships with local employers, such as hotels, hospitality, community colleges, to jointly pursue the creation of workforce and seasonal housing for employees and students using underutilized facilities. So if say, community college has dorms and they aren't being actively used in the summer, could those be used for a different purpose for seasonal employees? And coordinating and partnering with organizations that serve seniors in particular to support creating and preserving low-income housing for seniors. Yeah.
I was wondering if you're aware that we have a $2 million line of credit with the Cape Cod 5.
I believe I had some information on that from a prior plan, but that's good to highlight. Any other comments or questions on this goal? Okay. The next goal is to support the housing stability of year-round low-income renter households. So this is thinking about the most vulnerable in your community. So this could be creating an emergency rental assistance program to stabilize housing for those at risk of homelessness, while simultaneously coordinating and guiding on accessing other regional, state, or national programs that can give them some more additional long-term support. But also utilizing local and state housing grant programs that could be, the Community Development Block Grant, impact fees, which you could get from negotiating with developers under a special permit process, the Community Preservation Act, anything you already have at the Affordable Housing Trust, to create a longer-term local rental assistance program for eligible households. And granted, that is, is a bigger dollar ask than an emergency housing program, which is a little more short-term and can be capped at a certain dollar amount maximum per household or something like that. You'd have to kind of think through that one. And it's a local option. It's something that's usually done more at a state level. So that one also comes with a little bit of an asterisk next to it, but Is in,
Laura,
Laura,
just,
yes.
go ahead, Nancy.
Well, on A, that the second line in that simultaneously coordinate and guide on other regional state things, I think that it's getting out of we're looking at the rental assistance in terms of funding and looking at that, but I think that second sentence gets us into an area that probably may be out of our jurisdiction in terms of going to the next level. There are enough organizations that can guide people to what else is available. So I feel that that opens a door that maybe we don't want to have our responsibility for, but.
okay. I mean, it's something I was thinking sometimes, like, councils on aging serve that sort of purpose for people, and sometimes it's about pointing them to the right organization or number to call, and maybe that's how it needs to be phrased,
Yes,
is more of a directing them to
Just
the
let people know,
organization.
on our website, we have places you can go to do things, but guiding and coordinating and guiding are two words that I would not like to put in this, if I have my
Okay,
opinion.
yeah, that is more of a sort of a social service.
Right.
Laura, just two items on 8. We did have an emergency rental assistance program during COVID. We set it up. All the communities and Community Development Partnership worked together. We had it, and Homeless Prevention Council knew we had it, and they were able to keep going. We never had to draw from it, but it was sitting there, and if we had to reactivate it, the file is still alive. We could do it again. The other thing is, on several times in these, you talk about community development block grant funds. We've never been eligible for community development block grant here in New
Even,
Orleans.
well, even to apply for at all?
Our income, George, I think we've,
So we could apply for project-specific.
Yeah, project-specific.
Affordable housing only, projects on our own. The last one we did was Opa's Way in 1998.
Yeah.
Obtained a grant there.
Yeah, I knew you weren't a automatic, recipient, but I figured you could apply for a specific project.
we don't even qualify for the rehab program that are done in Truro and Wellfleet and Eastham and Dennis. Our income level at the time was too high to qualify.
Okay. All right, I'll make a note of that.
Having come from a community that was an entitlement community, it's a great program.
Yes.
But it considers the average income, and we have some pretty wealthy people who live here. So
Yes.
it's an unfortunate data point. It doesn't tell the story.
Right. Any other thoughts on the strategies for this goal? The next goal is to support existing cost-burdened low-income homeowners through outreach programs and funding. One of the strategies here is really just to better understand the housing needs of cost-burdened homeowners and doing some targeted outreach around there, in particular trying to figure out to what extent the need is and what the need is. Presumably, there are some, but maybe, substandard units, maybe, but probably more likely it's a mobility, question of sort of mobility modifications and things like that. But if they could be approaching substandard conditions if they aren't able to afford maintenance upkeep. And so one of those is just understanding that. And then another is enhancing the funding for the homeowner needs. So, and here I have my CDBG funds again, which I may have to rethink. But funding in general to strengthen the small grant program to fund emergency repairs for homes and retrofits for mobility disabilities. And that could include, outreach or enhancing that program. And partner with local tradespeople and the local community college to build community support networks for home repairs. So there might be a kind of a community support volunteer network that could be encouraged.
Would we add Hesh into that?
Pardon?
Would we add Hesh?
Well, yeah, we have a program with Harwich
Howard.
Ecumenical Council for Housing, HETCH, and we started out, it was funded under CPA, and when that money ran out, we transferred it to the trust. So we have that program underway.
Okay, great. And it exists now, or it's something
Yep.
that could be, okay, great. And then this is a similar idea to the emergency rental assistance program, but it's a general emergency housing assistance program for eligible homeowners to provide, say, up to $10,000 to pay overdue and future mortgage payments, condo fees, insurance taxes, or moving costs, sort of as a housing stability move for homeowners who are facing potential housing instability.
This is something we may be faced with as we tie in the sewer, because there are going to be betterments that are going to be charged to every property owner. And I suspect we may hear from some of the lower-income homeowners saying they need some help. And the trust has the ability to do that under its existing charter.
Yeah, and I believe a betterment is sort of, it's considered a tax, so I think that would be covered. Any other comments or questions on this goal? All right, so the next one is to support opportunities for first-time home buyers up to 200% of the area median income. That to continue advocating at the state level to allow the town to purchase veil and deed type deed restrictions on existing rental and ownership units to restrict their sale or rental to Orleans residents or employees, to support local businesses with funding, tax deductions, and technical assistance to provide for more employee housing, to establish a down payment assistance program to promote moderate and middle-income first-time home ownership opportunities within the existing housing supply, potentially in combination with the Mass Housing One program, or One Mortgage program, and continuing to advocate at the state level to allow the town's housing trust through its home rule petition to finance housing programs within the 100 to 200% area median income. Any thoughts on this goal or strategies?
Just remember, B, you've got tax deductions in there. We need to think about the legality of that.
Okay.
And we're more than willing to take a deed restriction to make the units affordable, then they get a reduction, but otherwise, I don't think it can happen.
That's a good workaround. Any other thoughts on that goal? Okay. There's three more. The next goal is to sustain and increase as needed dedicated and experienced town staff to continue coordinating the town's housing efforts and partnerships, including the housing coordinator and planning department staff with consultants. So just continuing that funding for the housing coordinator and planning staff position, and thinking of, if there are capacity implications for some of these programs and things that you want to start doing, just how that's going to get staffed, and do you need more of a full-time housing coordinator? Do you need any other kind of staffing changes? It's really it's a conversation that obviously needs to happen with, the select board and others, but that's just at least keeping what you have is important. And then we have that goal I mentioned, or the strategy rather, I mentioned earlier of creating a housing roundtable to provide for ongoing coordination of housing efforts and ensure implementation of, this report, well, it says this report's implementation, but this report's, strategies. That could include the Community Preservation Committee, the Affordable Housing Trust, the Housing Committee, the Select Board, the Planning Board. You could expand it even outside of just the town organizations to social service organizations or other local and regional groups to kind of have a summit maybe once a year. It's a broader one, and maybe you meet internally more often, but to have some sort of structure where these boards and committees can really strategize and prioritize together about the action plan, and kind of, because we know this is a 10-year plan, so you're going to need some flexibility about what happens first, second, and third, and you'll need a system to help manage that. And then participating in the Barnstable County Shared Regional Housing Services program, they have a 2-year demonstration project that's just starting. So maybe it'll turn into something, maybe it won't, but at least participating in that 2-year demonstration, and you might be able to have some more regional capacity to do some programs at a regional level. So exploring that as an option. Any other, yeah, Ward.
I got snagged on the annually word.
Mm.
You know, when I'm in a group that meets annually, we don't go very far very fast. And I can see, you know, the convention kind of thing, but I like a round table, but I think it's going to be, I don't know if you should even dictate how often it should meet, but, you know, the idea that we were saying we're meeting annually just snagged me.
Yeah, maybe I'll just throw a case study in there as an example or something, and you all can decide what makes sense. And maybe it changes over time. Maybe you meet more often at the start, and then you're able to get into a slower rhythm, you know, quarterly or semi-annually. Maybe that means there's a larger convention once a year where you bring in outside regional groups, and the rest of the time you're meeting kind of internally and checking in with each other. So, yeah.
I think I'd emphasize what it is that you gain when you coordinate like that. Instead of just saying, okay, well,